This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
In this episode of BiCurean, Erik and I spoke with sex therapist Tara Galeano about connecting and intimacy in the time of social distance.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's a Nerd
and Nerdette
from the Voice of Misery podcast. If you want a show that's about pretty much anything, it's a variety show about life, love, mental health, the pursuit of happiness, and a ton of different interviews going from Karen Parsons to Ava Devine and other various adult film stars or just random people on the street that I think are interesting. You should give us a shot. Voices of Misery podcast. Voicesofmisery.podbean.com. At Voices of Misery on Twitter. And Voices of Misery anywhere you can find your favorite podcast. Give us a shot if you're not easily offended.
Hi, I'm Erik.
And I'm Aisla.
And together we are the hosts of the BiCurean podcast.
BiCurean is our answer to the polarizing culture we live in.
Tired of feeling under siege and looking for ways to get involved? Then come be a part of a different way of thinking.
Everything from politics to geek culture to current events that polarize us as a society, we explore multiple ways of looking at things. Welcome to the show.
I am Erik.
And I am Aisla. And we are here with Tara Galeano, a sex therapist, who is going to introduce herself.
Hey, my name is Tara Galeano. Thank you so much, Aisla and Erik, for having me on your show. I'm really honored to be here. I'm a sex therapist. I've been in practice for about 20 years as a clinician, and I now host retreats for women who are rediscovering their bodies.
That is really cool. And you said you're in Sonoma, right? So kind of a little ways away from things with the coronavirus. And
yes and no. I mean, I think that California has been really conservative with their restrictions around coronavirus. I know Colorado's got a 3-step program in place where they're implementing changes back to normalcy, whatever that may look like in the future. But here in California, there's still a lot of closure. I don't necessarily feel like there's been, for every step forward, there's been 2 steps back. So the bike path across the street from where I'm staying is now not open to cars, but you can walk on it, but you can't park there. So you really need to be able to walk there to get there. So it's fascinating how, and all the beaches are closed, which is a big bummer because I'm in California. I want to be on the beach and happy, but
that's not affecting that's not affecting the East Coast apparently, but
or Florida.
Exactly, not in Florida, exactly, yeah. But if you're a private member of the local golf course, you can go there soon. But the beaches are still closed to the public, so yeah, just noticing.
Yeah, no, totally. So maybe to start, I think some people may know this and some people may not. So it seems like as good a place to go as any. What does a sex therapist do?
Oh, that's a great question because I think a lot of people actually don't know. Somebody just told me recently they didn't know any sex therapist or know what a sex therapist did until they met me. And I thought, oh, I'm so glad to be a representation of that.
Mm-hmm.
So a sex therapist is a psychotherapist. So I am a talk therapist. I focus in on the topics of sex and sexuality. And for myself in particular, I'm focusing in on the body. I think that there's so much wisdom inherent in the body that we overlook, that we dismiss, that we like to conceptualize or become more cerebral about, but the body has so much information. And so I like to help clients unpack that in terms of enabling them to create a vocabulary around sex and sexuality so they can start to talk about their experience for themselves, and then hopefully speak about that with a loved one, a partner eventually, and then be able to have a little bit more agency in how they express themselves sexually.
Well, that sounds super positive and really needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very much needed. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because you said psychotherapist, which, in that regard, and I realize you may have a different kind of opinion on this, but I'd be curious to hear what it is, how much of things involving sex and maybe body positivity or even just being in touch with that aspect, fears of intimacy, how much do you find that might affect other aspects of people's lives?
I think it's huge. I think oftentimes when people are coming to sex therapy, they're highly functioning and they're often feeling fairly successful in many areas of their life. But then this aspect of intimacy is one where they're not really clear on how to make it successful, because it's not something they can Google and say, how to have a more intimate relationship with their spouse. Oftentimes, what I find is that they're working effectively in the relationship with their significant other or others if they have them, um, but the intimacy is not there. So they're living together as roommates, but there's not this erotic spark. And so there's a great need for this, and there's not a lot of fluency in our culture around speaking about these topics. And so we don't learn sex positivity necessarily in the home, and we certainly don't learn it in the schools or in our educational systems. And so I think that oftentimes it's something that an individual needs to take on for themselves, that they want to have better sexual expression, they want to have better sexual interactions, they want to have a better erotic life, and they want to be able to explore that with others with some competency and with some confidence.
Yeah, that's once again like really helpful. I have a really close friend who went through a divorce in the fall, and you really had to. One of the reasons that he initiated that was there was a lack of intimacy, and they couldn't really recover that. And so, through November to like February was dating, and then coronavirus kind of struck, and it's he's really had to sort of like step back, obviously, from that process of rediscovering himself in that way, right? Like that was part of the motivation for the choice he made, and yet it's not really available to him in certain ways. And so I'm curious, in your capacity, if you run into people who are in that position and how they're handling the realities of the danger of meeting strangers in a certain way right now. And yet also the priority that intimacy has and the ways that it can help us manage stress in difficult situations and maintain mental health.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yes to all of that. I see all sorts of variations. And I think coronavirus has really intensified the human condition, and that anything that we were living months ago is now just really amplified in these few weeks, how much life has changed. And so I know a lot of people who were dating are not necessarily dating now, or if they are, they're using platforms like Zoom to meet people, and that their sexual expression has changed, and that it's mediated through the internet or through apps, and that there's not in-person sexual contact because people want to maintain social distancing and be safe. So things have really drastically changed. And I was just on a phone call with a bunch of sex therapists over the weekend talking about this. And one of the things that one of the sex therapists suggested was the return to love letters. And I thought, oh, that's so romantic and beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I it's interesting because we've had different guests on since the coronavirus thing has hit, and universally, I have been surprised by the different ways that it has affected different things. But yeah, I would imagine that people having to find a different way to express, especially in a world where, as for you, getting people to feel able to be comfortable even expressing, and now all of a sudden there's social pressure not to. So it's got to be an interesting road as you've met people.
Yeah, and what I find is that it's one thing to go out on a date and be there in person and be vulnerable and show up. And then it's another layer of how do you show up and create that intimacy when, again, it's mediated through video. And so a lot of people who struggle with body image issues then are feeling uncomfortable because then they can see themselves on video, and they're not comfortable with that image. Or if they're having a sexual interaction and maybe their body parts are showing that they don't really feel comfortable with it, they're now really seeing close up on the video, ways to work with that. So really the sense of, I would say, ultra vulnerability in some respects, because we're being seen in a way that is different than how we show up in person.
I hadn't really thought about that. I definitely find it uncomfortable to see myself on video. And that's just this conversation, let alone a dating encounter of some sort.
Yeah, I can imagine that's been interesting. So out of curiosity, and I think the reason I'm asking this is because I'm curious to see what your experiences have been around this. But as this has advanced, and we've done several shows around COVID from pretty much the initial lockdown through different things, we've talked to different people. But are you seeing any shift in people's mentality around the ideas of things as things are reopening? Have people been venturing to meet in person now, or just in an overall general way, are you seeing any kind of shifts in that as it's gone on?
That's so fascinating to me because I've seen actually more slowing down as people are becoming more concerned and there's maybe a little bit more fear. I know things are opening up in other places in Texas and Montana and Missouri, but from where I'm at, in my view, and the clients that I'm working with, I'm not seeing that. Initially, I did have clients who were going out on dates and practicing social distancing, which was fascinating to me. So they said they would meet in a public place like a park and go for a lap around the park, and they would be 6 feet apart. And that's what they wanted to do because they wanted to make that connection. And now things have changed where most of the people that I've been speaking with aren't actually that interested in dating on the apps. So I would say, at least from my client population, that there's been a pause and a reevaluation of what it is that they want for themselves. And so, more intimacy with their own self pleasure. So, maybe using sex toys or just experiencing pleasure with themselves as opposed to seeking that with a partner. It's different for different people because one of the other terms that came up this weekend when I was with these sex therapists was HSP, which is household sexual partner, which may be different from your regular partner. So, who is a person that you're with during this time of coronavirus? Someone else mentioned to me their coronavirus marriage. So, who is the person that they're partnered with during this time? And with the collapse of a lot of social norms and this intensity and this uncertainty, that a lot of experiences, a lot of emotional vulnerability as well, and the connection or the intimacy then that is created in that time or in this time is much more intense, and the trajectory has then become much quicker in terms of where the relationship may have normally begun and how they may have been dating in the beginning to where they are today, 2 months into coronavirus and sheltering in place. So it's a very fascinating process. I wonder at the end of this if we'll see more coronavirus babies, if
Oh,
we'll
I think
see
that's
more
a given.
coronavirus relationships.
Well, you actually, you just mentioned the coronavirus relationship thing. Is that something that you have seen? Because I think you intrigued me on something when I realized how many people might be in what was an assumed roommate situation or living with a friend, and suddenly just being locked down and even isolated has bred some sort of intimacy.
Exactly, yes. And not only that, people who may have been in well, I mean, so many different variations, but people who may have been in a committed relationship because of immigration issues or because of whatever separation, they were not able to be together. Some people are not with, again, their primary partner. And some people who practice polyamory aren't with their other partners. People who are in monogamous relationships may be better off at this time than anyone else. But yes, that you may be cohabitating with somebody that you may not have been in a sexual relationship with, but now you are. And I have seen that. And I think that it is very fascinating to see how things have shifted for those people because there is such a desire for intimacy and sexual connection. And as you were saying earlier, Aisala, about the benefits of sexual expression, that it increases our immunity, that it increases our sense of well being, that it releases endorphins. I mean, all of those benefits are inherent from sexual interaction. So when you're having that with another person that you're living with, it can actually be of great benefit for the whole household.
Yeah. Um, so in terms of the ways in which people are maybe meeting, can you speak to, like, I guess you're saying like you've seen it slow down, they're not using apps. Do you think that people are kind of like maybe focusing on those household partnerships, or are people actually still meeting and getting to know new people, or
Again, it varies from place to place. What I did hear some of my colleagues say, and they were reporting from around the country, was that there is an increase in the uses of nude selfies, uh, and that sexting and phone sex, and actually some apps, that people are using to connect. So they haven't seen any decline in terms of their client population, and that people are actually meeting again on video dates. And it's just, different populations are different in different areas, and my clients, that's not the case. uh, but other sex therapists are seeing that, and I think those are great ways and safe ways to connect with other people. Sexting, phone sex, nude selfies, all of those are not going to be spreading coronavirus, and keep people with the appropriate proximity so they can be in their social space that's safe for them.
yeah.
Yeah, I think we've all found different ways to get by in this current world. It's been interesting, um, and as I mentioned, like, yeah, the idea of what's going on with relationships was something that kind of hit me. Like, we've had friends, we've had a friend that had ended a relationship that basically was happening right as things were going up and has just moved out. There's people like buying houses. There's certain things that need to happen. Somebody who was in a situation, some of that stuff actually just needs to be dealt with. It's not like there can be a complete pause on everything. So, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. I feel like with sex, there is a lot of ways in which people will find a way if they have a healthy relationship with it.
Well, one of the
Yeah,
things
absolutely.
one of the things that I was reading was that what this has also brought out is, more monogamous couples or are experiencing that in some ways the way that they dealt with the problems in their relationship was being away from each other. They had really busy schedules, and they had not overlapping or high intense jobs, or not overlapping friendship circles. And now they're kind of forced together, and that's creating, conflict. Is it also creating connection? I mean, have you seen that or heard about that? And if you are in a, monogamous relationship together in this experience, are there suggestions for ways to, even if you weren't necessarily trying to avoid each other, ways to create good opportunities for intimacy when you have so much more enforced time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think whether you have a good relationship or whether you don't, you're going to be spending more time with your partner during coronavirus, or maybe you have. And what needs to happen, I find, is that there needs to be some sense of space or boundaries that are established between the individuals in the relationship. That in order for an erotic space or an erotic connection to be developed, there needs to be a sense of imagination. There needs to be a sense of playfulness. And those are elements that involve, um, I would say, different characteristics in our mundane life. And so when people are not able to leave their home, and they're not able to go on their morning commute to go to work, or they're sequestered inside with their loved one all the time, that familiarity can breed contempt, as the saying goes, and that there really needs to be some space. So I really invite couples to have established boundaries, so this way they can then um, come together at a later time, where they're actually maybe even going out on a date. Maybe one couple I heard of went out on a date in their living room, where they actually got dressed up and had an event, and put on maybe one of, I forget what they did. They did a Zoom toast with some friends of theirs because it was their anniversary. And so using um, the video to help enhance their date, but not allowing it to take over. So then shutting it down, and then being with each other. So really creating that imaginative space where you can be playful with each other, and that's really needed. And that erotic space can only happen when there is a sense of mystery, and when there is the opportunity to be separate from each other. If we're constantly with each other all the time, then there's not an opportunity to pause and be oneself. Um,
Yeah, I'm wondering, and I bet that's actually a thing that a lot of people probably wouldn't think about, even if you like your partner, like how, just even the separation, the normal separation in a day is part of that equation. So yeah, I think this probably has made a lot of people consider what their personal time and space actually is, when it doesn't involve a commute or doesn't involve, you know, going out and doing that thing you have to do on Tuesdays or whatever. So, um,
mhm.
so here's kind of my next question. I'm just kind of curious because, and you kind of hinted and this has been big on my mind because I don't know what normal looks like after this. Like we can talk for the next probably 10 hours about the different things that might come back different. Um, I can tell you that for me personally, as things are reopening, it's really hard to convince myself it's worth the risk to go and get my hair cut. So, like there's just different aspects of this that, and I think people are feeling that because I've seen, reports out of places that are reopening, that they're in talking to some salon owner who's like, yeah, I haven't had anybody. And another salon owner has been booked solid or whatever. But as far as what you do and what you see, do you have any speculation on some different things that maybe will be more common going forward, related to the interactions you have with your clients and people in this? Basically, I'm asking like, how does this maybe shift things? Like, are people going to be more comfortable on video dates? Is it we already live in a world I feel like where people who are interested in each other text like crazy? Is that change in some way?
I think one of the things that has changed is perspective. Is that oftentimes what I've seen as a parent and as a clinician is that media has been seen as a disruption to intimacy or disruption to the relationship, and now I can see how it has actually been an enhancement and really a critical feature in connecting people. So platforms like Zoom have been kind of the mainstay for a lot of people to stay connected with their loved ones. And so people who may not have used Zoom before or felt like they weren't tech savvy enough to be able to do that, now there's really become some ease of usage and they're using it to connect with their loved ones, which I think is really huge. So I do think that these platforms will be used more regularly and people will have more familiarity with them. Another thing that I would say is that I think that this, the new normal is going to be a lot more spacious. People have been cooking more meals at home and not going out as much. And so naturally, there has been a little bit more intimacy in terms of the family life. And I do think that that's been I would say for the most part, for a lot of people who are enjoying their time with their loved ones, a piece that would stay the same. I can also say that yes, there's been an increase in domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and child abuse, and yeah, and that's really unfortunate, horrific as well. Um,
Yeah, we had a guest talking about that a few weeks ago, and then also just reading, that in France they had uh, a safe word, like a code word women could use at the pharmacy because you could go out for prescriptions so that they could tell the pharmacist this code word that they needed help. Um, and so it seems like there are some things in place to help with that, but I'm not as familiar. Honestly, I read that one article. Do you have any information that we could put out there about things that are being done here in this country to help address that issue? Domestic violence and child abuse, or are we out of code words in our country?
yeah, I mean that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have any resources readily at hand. It's not something that I deal with directly within the client population that I work with, but I do love this idea of code words, and I do recommend it to my clients, and I have used it myself because of the intensity of time that we spend together. I think there is naturally an irritation that happens because there's also this, larger context that we live within where there's so much uncertainty, which then again generates irritability for a lot of us in this coronavirus time. And so I ask couples to have code words so they can set specific boundaries about, okay, I need a break. Or and if they're not able to articulate that clearly, to use a code word that I need to leave, or this is not safe, or whatever it may be, that there's an escalation that's happening and they can't leave because there they are in the house together and they're not able to get out and go do something or visit a friend to go blow off steam at the gym, that there's some crucible that they're contained within, and that there can be this alchemical process that can be changing them for the better, but they also need to modulate it. And so things like code words and setting appropriate boundaries are really important. When it escalates beyond, irritation, then it's kind of beyond the scope of the work that I do.
That makes sense. So, do you have something? The other thing that came up for me is a lot of my friends who have younger children and are going through the difficult process of becoming teachers in addition to parents and workers and house cleaners.
Talk about not getting alone time. I really feel bad for a lot of parents right now that are just inundated.
Yeah, it's like a lot of stimulation and responsibility and a lot of exhaustion. And so I'm curious if you have any stories or tips or thoughts to share on how parents can find that space to rejuvenate and connect, because I'm sure that they need it even more in a lot of ways than many of us who aren't dealing with that extra level of I guess effort. I don't know.
In-house commitments.
In-house commitments. I like it.
Yeah, no, I so love that you bring that up. I used to, like, because I do think that that's really a very common experience for a lot of parents who have their young children at home, that all of a sudden now they're educators and math tutors and, teaching history and things that they hadn't had on their plate before. And I think really what comes to mind and what I've mentioned to people who've asked me about this is kindness, is really to be kind to themselves and be kind to others. I think when we, again, are experiencing this uncertainty, there's a lot of irritation, and that it's so important to remember to be kind and gentle with ourselves, and that it's okay to say no. So when you're feeling like you have so many insurmountable obstacles, like so many tasks on your lists of things to do, that it's okay to say, no, I don't want to be intimate tonight, or no, I don't want to be sexual tonight. That is a really appropriate way to take care of yourself if that is what you want. I think that that's so critical. That these times are just so different. I mean, I think that
there's nothing like this that has ever happened.
Like this. Truly. I mean, and I think that they're going to refer back to this as this time of adapting, because we're all learning how to adapt to different circumstances and environments, and our lives will change from this point forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. Again, I've had this thought of what even normal would look like. So, in a lot of ways, I'm utilizing the platform of my own show to ask people's advice, and they're experts on things like, what do you think we should all do? But along those lines, kind of something I like to do to, wrap a show is give some advice and all of that. But it sounds like you might have something. Do you have maybe 3 tips of something people can do from the context of, maybe we're not all going to be rushing back out and life is not going to be normal. Like what's something that people can do with themselves, with a partner, to, alleviate boredom, but also maybe learn something, get some gain from some of the downtime they've had?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, one of the couples that I was speaking with, they said they had a whole closet full of sex toys and they were just going through them. And I think the novelty of that is certainly going to spark some interest and release endorphins in your brain, because novelty is a really big way to connect with your partner. So yeah, sex toys can certainly do that. And I think it really depends on what it is that your goals are. I mean, coronavirus is, again, kind of this magnifying glass and really has intensified things for so many different people. One of the biggest issues that I've seen with the couples that I work with is the ability to set appropriate boundaries out of kindness, and kindness for themselves and kindness for their partner, and really appreciating their partners with those boundaries, or in addition to those boundaries. I think it's great to point out a behavior. Thank you for doing the dishes. And then it's really wonderful to express appreciation for your partner. You're so thoughtful, or you're so kind for doing the dishes. And so, really loving them up in that way, I think, is so important, especially because they're not getting that from many other places. I would say, by and large, in this time of coronavirus, because they're not interacting with as many people. So, if we can really express our kindness and gratitude to others and eliminate the expectations as much as possible that we would have during the normal times in our life, whatever that may be. And I also think that that because these are such exceptional times, that again, that we are gentle with ourselves and with our partners, that we don't go and question the relationship. Something must be wrong because we're not getting along during this time of coronavirus. I I would really say that conversation can be put on hold. And that really the most important thing is, how are you going to most effectively get through this time together in a loving and kind way? And those larger issues, if they come up later, can be addressed at that point. And now is not really the time to be looking at those bigger questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems like excellent advice.
Thank you. Yeah, no, like I said, I just love tips, tricks, general things, and you seem like a fount of knowledge on that sort of thing. So
Yeah. Do you have anything that you're working on that you'd like to let folks know about, or that are there places, email lists, or anything that you send out that you'd want people to check out?
Yeah, absolutely. So my big shift in my work has been hosting retreats. I'm very passionate about the process of transformation that happens when women are actually able to gather together,
Mhm.
whether it is virtually or in person. And I've been hosting retreats called Rediscovering My Body, which addresses body image issues and trauma, so women can have better sexual connection with themselves and with others. And I'm hosting one this month, and I'm hosting one next month. And I would invite people to join me on my Facebook page, Boulder Sex Therapy, so they can find out more information. But I love this. And what I find is that in this time of coronavirus, that it's so important for women to show up for themselves, because I think with so many people in the household, young children, adult children who may be home from college, who are supposed to be away, full houses are easy excuses for women to say, well, I don't have the time. And I think now is absolutely the time for women to show up for themselves. So this way they can have the pleasure that they want in terms of rediscovering their bodies. And I'm committed to the process.
yeah, that's a great. We'll post links to that,
Yep.
and if there's anything else, yeah, just send them over, and we'll make sure they go in the links for the show notes and stuff. So we would love to work with you in the future, and hopefully we can have some different conversations at some point, post or at least in the new coronavirus world. So
Yes, when it emerges. Yes.
So thanks for being here, and thanks for listening. If you have ideas, feedback, or thoughts, please find us on social media. We are BiCurean on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or email podcast@BiCurean.com.
and if you like what we're doing, please rate us on your listening platform of choice.
Thank you.